بك بعقابة الأمور، فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك علي. يا ربي إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك، وتتحبب إلي فأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك، كأنني التطول عليك، فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك، فارحم عبدك الجاهل وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك مجري الفلك مسخر الرياح فالق الإصباح ديان الدين رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق باسط الرزق فالق الإصباح ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله، ولا شبيه يشاكله، ولا ظهير يعاضده، قهر بعزته الأعزاء وتواضع لعظمته العظماء، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أنادي ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه، ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازيه. فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني، وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني، وبهجة مونقة قد أراني، فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه ولا يغلق بابه ولا يرد سائله ولا يخيب آمله. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويضع المستكبرين، ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاصم الجبارين مبير الظالمين مدرك الهاربين، نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين، موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها، وترجف الأرض وعمارها، وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق، ويرزق ولا يرزق، ويطعم ولا يطعم، ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى، وهو حي لا يموت، بيده الخير، وهو على كل شيء قدير. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك، وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك، أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأسنى، وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين، عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على صديقة الطاهرة فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين، وصل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة، وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي، حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر وحفه بملائكة المقربين، وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك، استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله، مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيت له، أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا، يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به، وانصره وانتصر به، وانصره نصرا عزيزا، وافتح له فتحا يسيرا، واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله، وتذل بها النفاق وأهله، وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك، وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا، وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم المم به شعثنا، واشعب به صدعنا، وارتق به فتقنا، وكثر به قلتنا، وأعزز به ذلتنا، وأغن به عائلنا، واقض به عن مغرمنا، واجبر به فقرنا، وسد به خلتنا، ويسر به عسرنا، وبيض به وجوهنا، وفك به أسرنا، وأنجح به طلبتنا، وأنجز به مواعيدنا، واستجب به دعوتنا، وأعطنا به سؤلنا، وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا، وأعطنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا، وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا، واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك، إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله، وغيبة ولينا، وكثرة عدونا، وقلة عددنا، وشدة الفتن بنا، وتظاهر الزمان علينا. فصل على محمد وآله، وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله، وبضر تكشفه، ونصر تعزه، وسلطان حق تظهره، ورحمة منك تجللناها، وعافية منك تلبسناها، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صلوات محمد وآل محمد. عجل فرجه.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Inshallah, we will get started soon. In the meantime, I wanted to mention that for this Ramadan, we are hoping to try and increase our monthly contributions to the center. For now, these are contributions that will go towards building the new mosque. In the future, inshallah, we hope that these contributions will continue and they will help us with the maintenance, with the upkeep, with making sure that there are people here to help ensure that we have good programs running, that your children are learning from good teachers. Inshallah, our goal this year, this Ramadan, is to raise $20,000 in monthly contributions. We've already signed up a few people, and inshallah, with your help, I'm hoping that we can get there soon. For those of you who do sign up for monthly contributions, we have t-shirts. I should have brought one with me. Sorry, they're not t-shirts, but they're hoodies. These are hoodies that you can swim with them. They have sunlight blocking, UPF 50. I don't know what that means, but I wear that same material when I go fishing and I don't have to wear sunblock or anything. It's got a hood, it's great. So I recommend you trying to get these hoodies if you can, inshallah. So if you sign up for monthly contributions, you can get one of these wonderful hoodies. And this is what it looks like. And you'll see it has our new logo as well. And with that, I would like to invite Sayyid Sulayman to the minbar to begin tonight's seminar. Please welcome him with a loud salawat.
We would like to everyone to stand up and come forward a little bit because sisters in the back are pushed into the corner. So we want to make sure they have the opportunity to see the TV. Please do come forward as much as you can. A disclaimer that this is a workshop, so it's going to be long, and you are free to take breaks, take water, tea, but please do understand that it's a workshop designed to be at least 1 hour long. Please recite a salawat.
So if anyone would like to get some tea or water or refreshments, we can have a few minutes while I set up, and please feel free to get some refreshments in the meantime. Can you see if Mohsin calls? वो मैं आपसे कह रहा था कि यहाँ पे कभी वो आवाज़ आती है देखिए अभी थोड़ी सी आ रही है ओके you're صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Yesterday we began to take a look at a very important work which many of you have heard of, many of you may have read. That is Risalat ul-Huquq, which is narrated from our fourth Imam, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. In terms of the texts that we have from our Imams, there are varying levels of certainty with which we can attribute a text to one of the Imams. Sometimes we have a very black and white picture where we say that something is either authentic or it is inauthentic. Some people have a misconception that if a hadith is da'if or weak, that means that it is inauthentic. And that is a mistake. Da'if means something that cannot be authenticated. But not being able to authenticate something doesn't mean that it is forged or it is inaccurate. Just to give you an example. Yesterday I used the example of evidence, say in a criminal case. Let's say that you find a murder weapon in the location where a crime took place. If you don't have a clear accounting of where that weapon was and in whose custody it was from the moment of the crime until the present, then that is da'if, because you don't have a chain. So let's say, for example, the crime took place 5 days ago, and today that weapon was discovered. Now, we don't know in that 5 days, was it just not discovered? Or did somebody come 4 days after the crime and plant it there? Both are possible, right? Now, if you discover a murder weapon 5 days after a crime, and it has fingerprints and you have circumstantial evidence that it is actually the weapon with which the crime took place, you might actually consider that to be strong evidence that will point in the direction of who is guilty of that crime. So it's da'if. Why is it da'if? Because you don't have a clear chain of custody for every moment. But in actual utilization, it's not weak, because you have evidence that this weapon, it wasn't planted, it is not false evidence, it actually is pointing you towards the party responsible for the crime. So sometimes, just because of the popularity in the general Muslim community of books of Sahih ahadith, people have this mistaken idea that that is the gold standard of what is accurate and authentic. It's certainly an important standard, but it's not always the gold standard. When you're dealing with trying to uncover the truth, whether it's the truth about who committed a crime, or it is the truth about what happened in Islamic history or in history in general, you have all kinds of evidence. Sometimes it's very strong, solid, sahih evidence. Sometimes it is not sahih evidence, right? Like archaeology. You dig up a coin from the time of, let's say, Imam Ali, alayhi salam. That's not sahih, because you don't know when it was last used, when it got buried in the ground. Could have been, somebody planted it there. It could be accurate. But it's a very valuable piece of evidence, especially if you can date it to that time. So, in the methodology of Shi'i Muslim scholarship. When something is sahih, meaning it has a chain of transmission, then it is given importance and it is even preferred to other sources of evidence. But we make equal use of many texts that are not sahih, but they have circumstantial evidence pointing us in the direction of their completeness, or what we'd call their provenance, meaning that they are authentic. I gave a little bit of an introduction yesterday, but just to give an example, and for those who weren't here, this will be introduction to the topic. For those who were here, it'll be a little bit of additional detail. We mentioned that there are several versions of Risalat ul-Huquq. Some of those versions are sahih in the conventional sense, meaning they have an authentic chain of transmission. We have a chain of custody. Then we have the version in the book Tuhaf al-Uqul, I brought a copy of it yesterday, that does not have an authentic chain of transmission. In fact, we don't have much information about the author, and that book was kind of just discovered from some lost library after several centuries of not having any kind of presence in the Muslim world. It's not quoted, it's not mentioned in bibliographies, it wasn't known, for a good 500-600 years. That book is not sahih in the sense of having a known chain of custody. It's kind of like that weapon that you discover 5 days after the crime took place. But what is the circumstantial evidence that it is a genuine and authentic text? Well, one of those pieces of evidence is that those other versions, they don't explicitly mention the number of rights that Imam Zainul Abidin is talking about in Risalat al-Huquq. Anybody remember how many rights there were that we talked about yesterday? 50. The versions that are narrated with a clear chain of transmission, they don't mention that these are 50 rights. Although we know that they were always intended to be 50 rights. How do we know that? One of the sources that mentions Risalat al-Huquq, if you can see it on the TV, it's the first source, Al-Khisal. Al-Khisal is a book written by Shaykh Saduq that primarily contains a hadith of a kind of edifying nature, etiquette, ethics, and it's organized by number. So you know how the Prophet will sometimes say there are 3 things that every believer should do. There are 5 things that will protect you from the fire. There are 7 things that are important for istighfar. So those ahadith that mention a number, they're organized by that number. Those ahadith that mention the number 4 in one chapter. Those ahadith that mention the number 5 in another chapter. So Risalat al-Huquq is in which chapter? 50. So clearly, Shaykh Saduq knew that this hadith is mentioning 50 rights, because he put it in the chapter of 50. But then because he didn't quote the introduction, and maybe he was using a version that was already abridged, or he was abridging it in order to fit it into his larger book, he didn't mention explicitly that these are 50 rights. So, somebody who's reading that hadith, they might say, why did you put it in the chapter of 50? Because there's no explicit mention of 50. But the version of Tuhaf al-Uqul completes that picture, and at the end, Imam Zainul Abidin says that these are 50 rights that you are responsible for as a believer. So do you see how that works? The version that is authentically narrated with a chain of transmission implies something, but we don't quite know, why would Shaykh Saduq put it in the chapter of 50? Then you go to the other version, and you see that the text, it flows very clearly, and that number is mentioned explicitly, and it explains why Sheikh Saduq would put it in that chapter, even though the version that Sheikh Saduq is transmitting is abridged. And this is one of those ways that we use different sources, and sometimes technically the version in Tuhaf al-Uqul is da'if. Da'if not in the sense that it's fake or it's inaccurate, da'if in the sense that we don't have a clear chain of transmission and a chain of custody. But that da'if hadith in some ways is more sahih in terms of the text. It's more complete. So that hopefully it adds a little bit of detail to what we discussed yesterday. It completes the picture. And then there are other things that we can talk about depending on how much time we have at the end of today's presentation. But we started talking about the rights. I'll just review the categories that we had. The Imam says that these are rights that surround you in all of your moments, your movements, when you are standing still throughout your life. Right of God comes first. That's just one right. Then there are categories. The rights of your soul or yourself, your nafs, and there are several limbs and organs that you have. So that is a chapter with several examples within it. The rights of your actions, your acts of worship like salat and sawm and so on, and then all of your deeds, your actions that you do. The right of your leaders, the right of your subordinates. This is what we covered yesterday. And then we have two more, the rights of your relatives or family, and the rights of others, or other rights. So these are the two categories that we'll talk about today. Those two chapters, though, they have a large number of rights. So the first 5 categories, God, yourself, your actions, your leaders, and your subordinates, those were a total of 20 rights. And these last 2 chapters, your family and others, that will be 30 rights for a total of 50. That's what we'll talk about today, inshallah. And again, it'll be very brief just to give a flavor and an idea. And then, inshallah, we'll try to draw together the lessons that we learned. Any questions before we proceed and look at these 30 rights that Imam Zain al-Abidin enumerates for us? Question?
I was not here yesterday, so I apologize. Can you define the definition of rights? What does that really mean, the profound meaning of it, deeper meaning?
So what does rights mean? Imam Zain al-Abidin does not define it in this text, but we have the word haqq used in Quran, used in ahadith, and it can mean several different things. All of them are related. It can mean truth or reality. It can mean right, and it can mean responsibility. And what draws together all of those meanings is that it refers to the proper place and wisdom for any act or any object within creation. So when we say that Allah did not create the universe without purpose, batil. The opposite of haqq is batil. And that Allah did create heavens and earth bil haqq, with truth. The contrast, batil, meaning without purpose. On a whim, for example. So then haqq, the opposite of batil, is that everything has a purpose and a proper place. So we can say at its essence, haqq means a proper place, a proper purpose and wisdom for everything. That creates responsibilities, that gives rights, that is what is real and what is true. So it draws together those different meanings, inshallah. That's a very important point. We can expand on that maybe further in another opportunity. So now coming to the 6th category of rights, your relatives. The first that the Imam mentions is your mother. And there was a question yesterday, is there a order of importance within these rights? Well, you can see that here, that the rights of the mother come first, then the rights of the father are mentioned. And that is in accordance with the very famous hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. Of the priority of doing good to your mother, being kind to your mother over and above anybody else, including your father, and other teachings that we have within the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. So here as well, the Imam, he begins, and this is true of a lot of these rights. You'll see what the Imam says, فَحَقُّ أُمِّكَ, in this case, the right of your mother, أَن تَعْلَمْ, for you to know. So the right that the Imam mentions, in the case of the mother, in the case of the father, in the case of other relationships, the right is for you to know something. Meaning, remind yourself of a certain reality. Now, normally when we think, okay, what is it that I owe my father, or my mother, or my child? We're looking for an action. Right? Do I have to obey? Do I have to provide financial support? What is the action that I am called upon to do? What Imam Zain al-Abidin does is he switches the focus from the action to the recognition of an obligation, of an honor that is bestowed by Allah. And then what the Imam wants is for the action to flow automatically from the recognition. Pause for just a moment and ponder, is it the same thing? No, it's a very big difference. When your focus is on the recognition, then it motivates you not just to fulfill the right, but to contemplate how you can fulfill that right in the best possible manner. It's not what you have to do because your mother is your mother, but rather how you should think of the relationship. And when you focus on how you should think of the relationship, then it's a continuing motivating factor for you to act and speak and think in a better way. So just to the other ones, I won't repeat the explanation, but just to explain what is the perspective the Imam is giving us and how he's shifting our natural tendency to think of actions in favor of thinking of the relationship. In the case of the mother, the Imam says, فَحَقُّ أُمِّكَ أَن تَعْلَمْ, for you to know, أَنَّهَا حَمَلَتْكَ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْمِلُ أَحَدٌ أَحَدًا. She carried you where nobody carries anybody else. Nobody carries another person for 9 months. Through sickness, through the heat of summer, illness, hardship. It's a burden that nobody would voluntarily carry for anyone else. وَأَطْعَمَتْكَ, and she fed you in a way that nobody else would feed you. She protected you with her hearing and with her seeing and with her eyes, with her hands, with her foot, with her feet, with her hair, with her skin, with all of her organs. And she did all of that. We might do that for a friend or for a relative, but then we might complain or we might say, why me? She did all of that mustabshiratan farihatan. Gladly, willingly, happily. It was a source of pride for the mother. And then the Imam, he continues and describes the sacrifices and the beauty of the character of the mother. And then the Imam says, after he describes all of that, he says that when you recognize all of these things, that she was a source of protection for you, a source of nourishment and sustenance for you, then the Imam says, فَتَشْكُرَهَا عَلَى قَدْرِ ذَلِكَ. Your right then is to recognize and then thank her in accordance with the weight of what she has done. Right? Thank her in accordance with all that she has done. And then the Imam says, وَلَا تَقْدِرُ عَلَيْهِ إِلَّا بِعَوْنِ اللَّهِ وَتَوْفِيقِهِ. Of course, you're not going to be able to thank her in accordance with all that she has done, except if God helps you and if He gives you tawfiq, if He gives you His divine grace. So what are the things that the Imam is doing? Focusing your attention away from what you need to do to repay your mother, to how you should think about and appreciate the role of the mother. And then when it comes to actually acting, recognize that you can't do anything, but rather you should seek the help of Allah in order to be able to repay some of the debt that you owe to your mother. So it's a reforming of our focus from what I need to do to how I need to think. And that is true of all of the relationships. So it'll be true of the father as well. حَقُّ أَبِيكَ تَعْلَمَ أَنَّهُ أَصْلُكَ وَأَنَّكَ فَرْعُهُ. For your father, recognize that he is your origin and you are a branch of that tree. Again, recognize, know, be aware of the depth and the reality of your existence and your relationships. In the case of the father, one of the things that the Imam says is that anything that you find in yourself that you are proud of, maybe you're very athletic, maybe you're academically successful, or you have a talent, anything that you have in you that you are proud of, know that your father is the source through which God gave you that blessing. Sometimes we might think that we've surpassed our parents. They weren't educated, I went and I got a degree, they weren't very successful, they worked a working class job and I'm a professional, or whatever the case might be. Remember that whatever you may accomplish, even if you attain a credential success that your parents, your grandparents didn't have, well, you are able to do that because God made them the means by which you are able to do that. The foundation that they laid, the life that God gave you through them is what allowed you to accomplish. So you owe gratitude. You shouldn't think that you've outgrown them. Question?
Yeah, so if we apply the same philosophy, like basically Imam is not defining an action, he's just saying us to know. If we apply same philosophy on the rights of God, like some religions would not define any formal, way of ibadah, like namaz, roza, and all those things. So why it's different in the case of God, where we have well-defined set of actions which we need to do?
That's a good question. The question is, if the focus is on how we should think of the relationship and not what we should do, in the case of God, how come we have specific obligations? With regard to others as well, there are some specific obligations. Some of them are mentioned by Imam Zainul Abidin. But the focus is on the recognition. And that is true of the right of Allah as well. So the basis of what we owe Allah is to recognize that our creation is not a coincidence. That we're not created by chance, by Mother Nature. That the very fact that we have a conscience, that we have an intellect, that we have emotions, they are a reflection of the purpose and the wisdom with which we were created. That's the basis. That's the focus. Then there are specific obligations that are built upon that. But there are people who pray and they don't think about their relationship with God. So they're doing the action, but they're not really focusing on what that action is meant to reinforce. And their prayer might not then bring them closer to God. It might not protect them from sin. So you see how even with God, recognition is the foundation, the actions are built upon it. And you can have people who do a lot of actions, but they don't have that recognition. their actions become shallow. They're not able to have the proper effect. So with God, also the focus is on recognizing who God is, what it is that we owe Him, which is our existence and everything within our existence, and then there are specific obligations that just reinforce that message. But those actions are not the focus. The salat, the sawm, the hajj, the zakat, those are not the focus. The focus is to recognize and to be grateful and to be humble before God, and then we reinforce that humility through certain actions. Same thing with our other relationships. You focus on the divine nature of your relationships. Like yesterday we talked about the relationship of a spouse. Right? So the Imam says, be grateful to God for your spouse. That comes before a specific action that you do, the feeling of gratitude. And that will result in certain actions, of course, which are equally important. Then the Imam talks about the right of your walad, or your child. Walad can be both son and daughter, but remember the Imam is speaking to an audience in Arabia with a certain cultural context. So sometimes if the masculine form is used, it's not exclusive. It's just the way that discourse was used. But walad, it can be used for both son and daughter. Even if the pronoun is masculine, the referent can be masculine, feminine, and also even plural. The word walad can mean son, daughter, or it can mean children. It's one form that has multiple meanings. So the Imam says that for your children, know that you can't separate yourself from your children. The good they do, that will come back to you. And the bad that they do, that will also come back to you. People, will see your child well-mannered and they'll say, may God bless his parents or her parents, they raised this child well. And they might see a child who is not behaving well and they'll say, didn't your parents ever teach you any manners? Now, there is a society where that's not the case, and where parents don't feel any kind of responsibility for their children's decisions, and children don't feel any kind of connection or responsibility towards their parents. That's not a healthy society. So the fact that that connection is strong is a good thing. The result of that strong connection, though, is that you do have to take ownership of both the good and the bad that might exist within your relative, in this case, within your children. So the Imam says, recognize that you are responsible for teaching them adab, manners, guiding them towards God, pointing them towards God, and helping them to obey God. That's a very important point. Al-ma'una lahu ala ta'atih. Help your children obey God. Some parents make it difficult by scolding, by having difficult expectations. Sometimes parents, they demand of their children something that is above what God has required us to do. And the parent might be making it difficult. The child still has an obligation to honor the parent and to obey God, but that is not what God wants. What God wants is make it easy for your children to obey Allah. Don't place additional burdens on them that are not wajib, and don't interact with them in a way that fosters a spirit of rebelliousness against God or against you. It's not always easy. The reason why parents are strict is because they have high expectations for their children. In some cases, they don't want them to make the mistakes that the parents made. In some cases, that they want them to excel. But if you are overly strict, or if you have too high standards, it might be coming from a good place, but it might have the opposite effect. So the Imam He says, remember that you are rewarded for the good that you bring about in your children, and that you will be punished if you don't train your children and raise your children to recognize God, to recognize what is good, if you don't facilitate doing good. Last thing I'll say about this is that many times in our families, we spend a lot more time training our children to be economically and professionally successful than we do training and preparing them to be religiously pious and successful. The focus of the Imam in Risalat ul-Huquq is that your children are a spiritual trust given to you by God, and how you treat that trust and bring it initiated into piety, that is going to affect your own salvation. It's not just your child's destiny, but it is also your destiny, your salvation. So give more importance to their religious and spiritual upbringing than to their material or educational or professional success. That's important, but the spiritual and the religious dimension is more important. Then the Imam talks about your brother. This can be your brother and your sister. And the Imam, he says that know, again, the focus is on what you know. Know that your brother is your hand that you spread out to act in the world. Your brother is your back that you rely on. He is your honor or your might that you will rely on or depend on when you're in difficulty. And your brother is your strength. Your children and your brother, the Imam mentions in greater detail than your mother and your father. And maybe the reason for that is that there is less need for specifics when it comes to mother and father. Really, all that's needed is a reminder. Otherwise, a person will often, have a strong natural inclination and understanding that you owe a lot to your parents. But sometimes that same recognition with regard to children and with regard to siblings is not there. So the Imam mentions more detail about what you owe your brother than what you owe your mother and father. Don't think that means that you owe more to your brother than your mother and father. It's simply that this is a right that is more likely to be ignored. And there are many families where, once parents are no longer alive or they are no longer that active, then that connection between siblings, it becomes weakened. As long as the parents are there to keep the family connected, or the grandparents are there, then the brother and sister, they meet each other because of the parents or grandparents. And then afterwards, they have their life, I have my life. So one of the messages of Risalat ul-Huquq is that there is a very powerful relationship, and the Imam mentions some specifics. He says that for your brother, also for your sister, for your sibling, help that person to gain control of their nafs, help that person against those who may be enemies, who may be adversaries, and be sincere to them where appropriate, give them advice, help them to do what is good. So honor that relationship. The next right that comes is the category of the rights of others. And this is the category, you can see that we have 5 slides. This is the one with the greatest amount of detail. So I will keep this a little bit more abbreviated than the previous ones, but let's go through the categories of rights within this heading of rights of others. One is somebody who al-mun'im alayka bil wala. Wala was a relationship defined in Islamic law that if a person enters into Islamic society as a slave. Again, we talked about the necessity of slavery yesterday. We're not going to spend a lot of detail talking about why Islam did not abolish slavery right away. But just to briefly reiterate, if slavery had been abolished, cold turkey, so to speak, then one of the harms that might have come is that the interaction and the integration of different races and ethnicities within Islamic society probably would not have been able to take place. So when there was war, a lot of times a winning tribe would still feel a little bit of a risk from the defeated tribe. And in pre-modern times, that often resulted in massacres. You can't just legislate away that social prejudice. Even in Islamic history, you will sometimes see those violent attacks against defeated people taking place. Part of that was because if your defeated tribe lives, and especially if they live freely, then they might want to take revenge, and there will be a continuing instability. So what Islam said is that within certain restrictions, slavery is permitted. The way that operated is that the defeated tribe, rather than having their lives be forfeit, rather than being imprisoned or killed, they were taken as slaves. And immediately they would be put in the most wealthy households within Islamic society, because those are the ones that could afford to own slaves and care for slaves. So they would get access to the best economic position, the best education, and this is borne out in Islamic history if you study, that within a generation or two, often the slaves or the descendants of slaves, they would come to the most wealthy and educated and even politically powerful positions within society. In fact, in India, in Egypt, you had Mamluk dynasties. Mamluk means a slave dynasty, right, where they became the rulers or the kings. This was a common occurrence among scholars, among administrators, and even among rulers. And the same thing is true of scientists and prominent business people and so on in society. So they were brought into the elite of society and given an opportunity to develop skills, and then Islam facilitated setting people free. That is where this right comes in. Wala was a relationship where you set a slave free. The person who manumits the slave is the Mawla of the slave. And that is not a blood relationship, but it's kind of like a blood relationship. And so the Imam says that if you set somebody free, a slave that you free, then if you are the person who manumits the slave, recognize that your slave is, your former slave, is the closest person to you after your own family. So treat them kind of as a relative. And the Imam also says that if that slave does not have any family to inherit from them, then the person who set them free will inherit from their freed slave. Because presumably to set a slave free, you've spent of your own wealth in the way of Allah to purchase their freedom. So if they have family, their family will inherit them. But if they don't have family, then the person who freed the slave will inherit from them. That's part of that relationship of wala. And very beautifully, even though slavery no longer exists, but this lesson Imam Zain al-Abidin mentions is relevant even today. He says, if you're going to inherit from that person, then honor the relationship while you are alive. Otherwise, you might inherit, and that money you get in inheritance, it's not going to bring barakah for you. Because you did not honor the relationship while you were alive, and then you benefit from it materially when you are no longer alive. How is that lesson generalizable? If you have relatives that you are going to inherit from, then make sure that you are honoring that relationship while they are alive. Otherwise, the inheritance that you derive, it might not have barakah for you, because you're just materially benefiting but not actually honoring the relationship. The flip side of that relationship of wala is the person who is freed. Right? So that is the freed slave. Right? So the freed slave is yeah, so this is not the freed man, the former slave. The slide is mistaken. This is a person that you are showing favor to. The Imam says that recognize that you are a protector for that person. And the Imam says that recognize that you are somebody that Allah has made a means between His favor and a person. If there's somebody that you are a benefactor of. If there is somebody that you are a benefactor of, then it is فَبِالْحَرِي أَنْ يَحْجُبَكَ عَنِ النَّارِ. It's appropriate that that person becomes a veil shielding you from hellfire. So whenever you are a benefactor for somebody, and I'm generalizing a little bit from the specific instance mentioned in Risalat ul-Huquq, but whenever there is somebody that you are showing a favor to, you've supported them economically or by mentoring or in any other way. Al-Jariya alayhi ni'matuk. Your ni'mah, your benefit is coming to that person. Think of that person not as somebody that owes you a favor. Think of that person as somebody that God has made a curtain protecting you from hellfire. So in reality, if you are showing a favor to that person, they are showing an even bigger favor to you. Because what are you doing? You're giving them, some minor material benefit in this world. What are they giving you? A much bigger spiritual benefit for the hereafter. So then, moving on, the Imam mentions somebody who has done a favor to you, a benefactor. Whatever that ma'roof might be, that good might be that a person has done. The Imam says that if somebody has shown kindness to you, they got you a job, they got you an internship, they gave you a loan, whatever that benefit may be. First, be grateful. Second, mention that good deed. A lot of times we have a tendency to want to sort of pretend that we accomplish things on our own. And we might be hesitant to give credit publicly to all of the people who participated in our accomplishment or our success. When somebody has done a kindness, the Imam says one of the things that you owe, تَذْكُرَ مَعْرُوفَ, the specific good that they did, mention it. وَتَنْشُرَ بِهِ الْمَقَالَةَ الْحَسَنَةَ. And then in general, you repay that person by saying good things about them in general. So specific good thing they did, mention it. And then in general, that they are a good person, spread a good word about them so they have a good reputation within society. Then the Imam says that make a sincere prayer for them in private. So you publicly elevate their reputation by mentioning the good that they do, and you privately pray for that person. And that's what the Imam says is a repayment that you do it both in sir and alaniya. In secret and in public, you honor that person through prayer and through mentioning their good. And then the Imam says that try to find a way to repay that person. And if you don't find something, then keep it in mind that I need to search for a way to repay that kindness myself. The next right the Imam mentions is the mu'adhin. We don't really think of this as a very important role. Sometimes, we have people who think that a child should do the adhan, and if you ask an adult to do the adhan, then they might feel like it is something that children should do. Within the Islamic tradition, adhan is a very important role, and it is a place of honor. So if we invite a child to do it, then that is to train them and to ready them for that very important role. And if an adult is reciting the adhan, they shouldn't think that it is something minor. That is, in the words of the Imam, one of the most honorable roles that a person can have. And there are many ahadith that say if people knew how blessed it was to recite the adhan, they would fight with each other to take the microphone and to recite the adhan. The word microphone is not in the hadith, but the message is that you would fight with each other to do the adhan. Of course, we don't want to have a fight for the adhan, but we do want to have a culture where we consider it to be a position of honor. And the reason for that is that this person is reminding you of your Lord, مُذَكِّرُكَ بِرَبِّكَ وَدَاعِيكَ إِلَى حَظِّكَ. They are calling you to get a good deal. So if there is a very special Black Friday deal and I find out about it, I might tell my close friends. Well, the best deal that you can get, not in material, but in spiritual terms, is to answer the call of Allah as soon as the time for prayer enters. That is the deal that the mu'adhin is inviting you towards. So the Imam mentions the right of the mu'adhin specifically, and say that, and he says that you should consider the fact that you have somebody reciting the adhan a blessing from Allah for you. Then your prayer question?
Yes. So there may be multiple different mu'adhins. How do you is it just?
Well, this is referring to a society where there would be a mu'adhin appointed. So this is a person who, in a neighborhood, would actually go on the roof of the masjid, and in a day before microphone and loudspeakers, would keep track, when is it zawal time, when is it maghrib time, when is it fajr time. They would call the adhan. So we can extend that. If you have somebody who is making a prayer chart for you, if somebody is helping you remember when to pray, or if they are specifically reciting the adhan, think of that as a blessing. And the reason why it is mentioned specifically and it's important is because prayer is important. So the Imam is doing several things, explaining the honor of the mu'adhin and reminding us of the importance of the prayer, because the adhan is a call to the prayer.
So even when people are calling the prayer from the roof, a lot of times we don't know who it is. So do we just acknowledge that someone did the...
Yes, circumstances of life change. So I might not know who is reciting the adhan. You don't have to place a name to those rites. But remember the introduction, part of what Risalat ul-Huquq is doing is it is telling us what are the rights that should be in our mind. So it's putting in our mind a certain set of priorities. Probably for most of us, the mu'adhin doesn't really figure in a mental sweep of the people that we owe a certain right to. But Risalat al-Huquq tells us that this is an important role. In fact, it was a paid position, in the public treasury in the time of the Imams. It's a very important position. So you don't have to place a name or a face to the role, but recognize the importance of that role. Recognize the importance of the adhan. Be grateful for people who will help establish prayer, call us to prayer, facilitate spaces and opportunities for us to fulfill that divine obligation. All of that is part of the lesson that we learn from the importance of the mu'adhin. And then the next one is the prayer leader. So when it comes to the prayer leader, that prayer leader is your ambassador before God. And the Imam says that your prayer leader is either doing his job or is not doing his job. If the prayer leader is not doing his job, then he bears a burden, but you don't lose anything from your prayer because there's a negligence on the part of the prayer leader. But if he is doing his job, then you are sharing in the reward and in the barakah of that congregation. So recognize the importance and the right of your prayer leader. In a sense, he's taking on a burden that you are not taking on, because he is responsible for that congregational prayer. By joining the prayer, you just stand to benefit. You're not taking on any additional burden. But the prayer leader, they are taking on the responsibility for the jama'ah. So honor that position and the person who is taking on that burden. The next right the Imam mentions is your jalis. There's no maybe specific translation in English, comrade, somebody that you sit with and you associate with and you spend time with. The Imam says that if you sit with somebody, they're your companion, when you're sitting together, then be kind to them and fair in your speech, and then remember the good things and forget anything negative that might have transpired while you were sitting together. It's a very important psychological lesson and not just a spiritual lesson. That whenever you sit with somebody, sometimes after you get up with relatives, with friends, you're like, what did they mean by what they were saying? Were they trying to make fun of me? Was there maybe something that I should be offended? And sometimes when we're replaying our conversations, we start to get angry after the fact. The Imam says make a deliberate effort. I don't know if you can relate to that or not, but it's a common human response sometimes to ambiguous interactions, especially if there's somebody you're not very close with. The Imam says when you're sitting with somebody, then be pleasant when you're with each other. When you get up, remember the good and deliberately make an effort to forget anything that may have been negative. Then the Imam mentioned something else, that when you're sitting with somebody, either you joined them or they joined you. So if I'm sitting here and you join me, you can stand up whenever you want. But I should not stand up until you get up to leave. Because when somebody joins me, if I get up, then that is a little bit of a discourtesy. It's as if, I got more important things to do and I don't have time for you. So notice the fineness, the subtlety of what Imam Zain al-Abidin is drawing our attention to. If you come and join somebody, when you're done, they were already sitting there, you have a question, you have something to say, you can get up and leave whenever you want. But if somebody comes and joins you, then let them be the one to initiate the farewell. You don't force it on them by saying, I want to leave. Of course, unless you have to go, that's a different circumstance. But if you are able, then let them be the one to initiate the farewell. Moving on, the Imam speaks of the right of a neighbor. Protect your neighbor when they're not there. Safeguard their interests. When they're present, honor your neighbor and try to maintain an honorable relationship. And when you are neighbors with somebody, you might find out things that are embarrassing. These days, there's these apps where you can talk about your neighborhood, sometimes in person, sometimes online. People notice things. They'll put online, what their camera has recorded about the neighbor, and that might be embarrassing for your neighbor. So it's as if Imam Zain al-Abidin was predicting some of these circumstances. It's always been the case even before cameras existed. If you notice something embarrassing about your neighbor, don't publicize it. But try to delete that footage and delete that memory and keep an honorable mention of your neighbor. Then the next right is a companion. The comrade was jalis, somebody you're sitting with. Companion is somebody that maybe you're traveling with or you're associating with in the course of your life. The Imam says very beautifully, أن تصحبه بالفضل ما وجدت إليه سبيلا وإلا فلا أقل من الإنصاف. Try to be a benefactor. So sometimes when we're, let's say, traveling with people, we might say, let's say we're traveling by car, we'll say, I'll buy lunch, you'll buy dinner. I'll pay for the gas, then next time it'll be your turn. The Imam says, try not to do that. Try to have fadl, meaning try to give more than you're getting. Whenever you're a companion with somebody, fadl, it's from the Quran, وَلَا تَنْسَوَا الْفَضْلَ بَيْنَكُمْ. Don't forget to act with grace. Try to give more than you get, if you're able to. But وَإِلَّا فَلَا أَقَلَّ مِنَ الْإِنصَافِ. At the very least, make sure you're fair. So don't be the person who tries to squeeze in and have your friends pay for lunch and you kind of just get a free meal as often as possible. At the very least, be fair, but ideally try to go above and beyond what is simply fair. The next is your partner. That can be your partner in business. It can be, if you jointly inherit a property and you have to jointly manage that property. The Imam says the right is that you don't act unilaterally, don't make decisions without consulting them. So make sure that you honor the fact that they have an equal right to that business or that property or whatever it is that you are jointly responsible for. Then the Imam mentions the right of wealth. This is not a person, of course, this is whatever you own. And here, the obvious thing, the Imam says, earn it in a halal way, spend it in a halal way. And then there's something very subtle the Imam mentions. The Imam says that don't let anybody else take precedence over your wealth, over yourself. Because if you have an heir that is not going to use your wealth properly, then what's going to happen? They're going to misuse it. You earn money from a halal means, then after you die, maybe, God forbid, your heir will spend it in a dishonorable manner or in sin, or squander it and waste it. So why would you prefer another person when you could have utilized it in a way that pleases God? Or you might have an heir that uses it well. And then they will take what the Imam says is ghanima to your exclusion. Meaning they use it well so they get the reward for something that you had earned. So the Imam is not saying to deprive your heirs of inheritance. What the Imam is speaking of is that tendency people have to sometimes become stingy and just to hoard wealth. If there is a place where you can use it in a way that is pleasing to God, in a way that is of benefit to your family, to your community, spending it in the way of Allah, then don't deprive yourself of that opportunity because you're just going to hand it over to somebody else. If they use it poorly, both of you will regret it. And if they use it well, they're not going to regret it, they're going to get the reward, but you will regret it because you could have gotten that reward rather than them. It's a very beautiful message with regard to wealth. The next one the Imam mentions is your creditor. He says that if you can pay, don't delay in repaying. Don't say, well, they don't need it right now. or it's not a big deal. If you are able, pay your debt even ahead of time. Pay it as soon as possible. If you are not able to pay, sometimes if you're not able to pay a debt, that probably means that you're under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And what often happens, especially within families, is you give assistance to somebody who is a relative, they're not able to pay it according to the expected time frame, but they also then become angry that, why do you keep on reminding me? You know that I'm not able to repay it. The Imam says that if you owe that money, then if you're not able to repay it, at the very least, be kind and gentle in speaking to that person who is a creditor. Don't combine not paying their money and also aggravating the relationship. So the Imam says, if you're able to pay, don't delay. If you're not able to pay, then at the very least, speak softly and try to get your creditor to give you some time and space as you need it. The next role the Imam mentions is Khalid. So this is, again, similar to Jalis. Jalis is somebody you sit with. We translated it comrade. Sahib is your companion, somebody maybe that you're traveling with or you're interacting with. Khalid is somebody that you kind of are, again, interacting with, maybe at work. They're an associate or an acquaintance or a colleague. That type of casual relationship that you have. In that case, make sure that you do not deceive, you do not lie. And if that person trusts you with something, then make sure that you live up to that trust. So sometimes, you have a relationship and people kind of assume that you have their best interest at heart. This is a very common thing where I assume, let's say that, I go to a Muslim mechanic or accountant or salesperson or real estate agent. I say because they're a Muslim, they're part of my community, so I kind of I'm letting my guard down. If you have an associate who is letting their guard down with you, the Imam says that make sure that you live up to their trust. Don't take advantage of it. And then there's a very beautiful sentence the Imam says, غَبْنُ الْمُسْتَرْسِلِ riba. If somebody lets their guard down with you, and then you take advantage of that to squeeze out extra profit, that's riba. That is spiritually a form of usury, which, as you know, in the Quran is considered to be war with God and the Prophet. So it's a very grave breach of trust. The next right the Imam mentions is if you have somebody who's made a complaint against you. A khasm, an adversary, a plaintiff, somebody who's complained against you. The Imam says if what their complaint says is true, then you become their witness against yourself. Meaning, fully give them their right. Don't plead the fifth and try to, figuratively speaking, don't try to avoid giving them what is their right. If they're making a claim against you that is false, then the Imam says be gentle in refuting their claim, because you don't want to aggravate they're already committing a sin by making a false complaint. Now, you might be offended that why would somebody come to me and complain about me in a false manner? And in your offense, you might say something that kind of hardens that person's heart. So very beautifully the Imam says, yes, they are doing an injustice. Don't respond harshly, because that's just going to make them more sinful and more likely to dig in their heels and continue to sin even more than before. So if somebody's complaining against you, support them if they're right. Be gentle if they are wrong. And if there is somebody that you have a complaint against, if they're true, then, meaning if your complaint is justified, then be moderate in seeking your right. Don't say that, all right, they owe me something, so I am going to squeeze every penny out of them. Seek your right, but do it in a moderate way. Don't try to squeeze everything that is your due out of them. And don't get drawn into a munaza'a and an argumentation. Remember, your goal is to get your right, not to put that person down or to show them their place or to debase them. Try to get your right in the most gentle manner possible, and don't get into an argument even if that person wants to get into a fight or an argument with you. And of course, if your claim against the person is wrong, then the Imam says that fear God and don't make a false claim. The next relationship the Imam mentions is somebody comes to you and is consulting with you. I don't know if that's a word or not, but I made it up. If somebody is seeking your consultation, offer your best advice with kindness. If you don't know what is the best course of action, then do your best to guide that person in the right direction. What do we normally do? I don't know. Right? If we don't have good advice, we often will just kind of put up our shoulders and let the person figure it out. When somebody comes to you seeking your advice, they assume that you might be able to help them. If you can, then don't say, I don't have time for this. Give them your best advice. If you're not able to, if you know somebody who might be able to guide them, then you go and try to help them find the guidance that they are seeking. And if there's somebody that is a consultant, somebody that you have gone to for advice, now they're not coming to you, you've gone to them. A lot of times we ask people for advice, but what we're really looking for is reassurance. We want them to say, you got this, just do what you want. The Imam says if you go to somebody for advice, if their advice disagrees with you, don't turn on them and doubt their intentions. You don't have to take their advice, but if they give you advice that is against what you wanted, it's not, building up your confidence, thank them, be optimistic about their intentions, then you decide if you want to take that advice or not. This is in the context of consultation. Then the Imam mentions nasiha. Nasiha is kind of also advice, but not necessarily consultation in terms of like a business decision, but in terms of a moral decision. What is the right way to respond, for example, to a difficult family relationship? How should I take care of, say, a difficult relative? So that is a form of nasiha. The Imam says if somebody comes to you seeking advice, moral advice, nasiha, then tell them what's right, but be careful that that person might not be able to bear the full brunt of the truth. Right? So let's say somebody comes to you for advice and you think that they're completely messed up in their decision making. Don't tell them that, you know what, you're a failure. You have to reinvent yourself. Look at what that person can bear and then give them your sincere advice with mercy to the extent that that person can bear. And then the flip side, if you go to somebody for advice, then don't go to them for advice as a formality. Open your heart, open your ears. If that person gives you advice that you think is right, it resonates with you that this is good advice, then accept it and thank that person. And if the advice they give you seems to be incorrect, then be grateful. Don't accuse them of having bad intentions. All right, moving on. If you have elders, respect that person for their age. If they have precedence in terms of Islam, respect their faith. Don't get into a disagreement with somebody who is an elder. Don't face them in a dispute. Try to diffuse it, and even if they're in the wrong, remember that they are an elder and they still are worthy of your respect. Question?
Yeah, for the advice seeker,
some people who are only seeking advice to, I guess, like get along with you and just basically kind of take advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what about those? Do you still treat them with kindness? Or?
Yeah, if somebody comes to you for advice, then regardless of what their reasons might be, there might be a number of different reasons. But what you want to do is you want to model that Islamic ideal, right? Especially in our society, consultation, advice, even family relationships, because we're an individualistic society. You know, I can't count on my brother, my sister, my friend, my distant relative in the way that a more close-knit society or culture would be able to count on those people. So what we are doing is we are trying to model that Islamic ideal, even if it's not present in society. So somebody comes to you for advice, they might have a number of reasons. Some of those reasons may not actually be to get your advice. But in your response, you try to model that closeness, that sincerity that Islam calls us to, so that gradually we can rebuild a more close-knit and a more healthy relationship. You know what I mean? Sometimes because, let's say your friends, your associates, your relatives, people seeking advice, people you seek advice from, because they have that assumption of an individualistic society, so they don't treat that relationship properly.
So, like, it's actually the opposite. Like, these people who come for advice to make connections, these are actually from, like, non-individualistic societies. I'm talking about, like, you know,
if they come to make connections, maybe it's a way to network, maybe it's just a way to build a bridge, then honor that, and don't be the one that destroys that bridge. So give your best advice, unless you feel like there might be something that is going to come back and harm you. Like if somebody comes to me advice and I suspect their only real purpose is to get me to invest in their multi-level marketing company, right? Or some kind of scam. You don't have to buy into the scam. But sometimes even when somebody comes to you without good intentions, by acting as if you assume the best in them, you are elevating the level of interaction within society. So an example of this is going to be when the Imam talks about somebody who is asking you for money. Right? A person who asks you for money, sometimes they're actually deserving and they need help. Other times they're professional beggars. They might be richer than you are, right? But the reality is that you're not just dealing with an individual. If somebody is not actually deserving and I treat them harshly, that's also creating a culture that beggars can be treated harshly. And that's going to have a harm even for those people who are deserving. I can't just make the excuse that, well, this person didn't have good intentions. They were just trying to get me to buy something. That interaction is going to create a culture, it's going to have repercussions within society. So you honor your part. If you have a suspicion of bad intentions, then protect yourself. Don't buy whatever it is that they're going to sell you. Does that answer your question? All right. So moving on, your elders, respect them for their age. Don't get into a fight with them. Youth, the Imam says, be merciful, teach them, train them, forgive them, and cover for them. There's a tendency that a lot of our elders have to complain about the youth. Oh my God, do you know what they do? And they talk negatively. The Imam says that's not how you should respond. If you are an elder in the community, then try to cover up the mistakes of the youth. Sometimes there are people who are afraid to come into the masjid because they're just going to get scolded, they're just going to get called out, they're going to be made to feel like they're dirt. And the Imam says that that's not going to help them eventually become pious. The way to encourage them, if they're committing a sin, to do tawbah, is to be gentle, to do mudarat. Mudarat is kind of like diplomacy. Figure where you say something, where you don't say something in a way that preserves a relationship, honors a relationship. Young people will make mistakes. Our goal is that they make fewer mistakes than they otherwise would, and that, God forbid, if they make a mistake, they come back. So as an elder, act in a way that invites them back and encourages tawbah and repentance. not in a way where you can kind of feel good and say, when we were kids, we never did this. Look at how bad the youth are today. It's often a tendency that we have within our societies, unfortunately. Then the Imam mentions somebody who is asking you for help, beggars. If you know the person is honest, then give them. If you're not able to give that person, then pray for that person. And if you doubt whether the person is honest, then the Imam says, think in your mind that, well, maybe it's shaitan who's just trying to deceive you and prevent you from earning reward by helping somebody. Keep that in your mind. And if in the end you decide not to, or you are unable to help, then at the very least speak to them with a kind word. And if you're not able to help, then if you're not able to give them something, then do what you can to help them in their need. Maybe point them in the right direction, refer them to somebody who might be able to help. So don't just say, all right, I don't want to help you, I can't do anything. If you can point them, then try to do that. All right, moving on.
Here's a
Question?
question.
Go ahead.
I have two questions.
Sure.
Could you reiterate the difference between the consultant and the consulter versus the advice seeker and the advisor?
Yeah, so the difference, they overlap. The consultant is istishara. Like, I am seeking your advice on what is the right course of action. So for example, in a business decision, in a marriage, maybe buying a house, buying a car, what kind of career to choose. We say mashura or mashwara, consultation, in order to know what is a good decision. So usually you'll go somewhere where there is an expert and you're looking to benefit from their expertise. That's consultation, right? Advice is more where you're looking for sincerity. Nasiha literally means to be sincere. So it might not be that you're going to somebody with expertise, but you're kind of going somewhere for moral and for emotional guidance. So that's why with consultation, the Imam says, point them in the right direction if you can, if you know what is the right course of action. With advice or nasiha, the Imam says, speak to them in a way that they can bear. Don't be too blunt. They come to you and they say that, I'm struggling with hijab, and you say, well, hijab is wajib, you're going to go to hell if you don't do it. Maybe if somebody is struggling with God forbid, drugs, or with prayer, or any issue, then you want to give them sincere advice, but look at where they are and what they can bear, and help lift them up, give them confidence, give them strength. Does that clarify the difference? They do overlap, because obviously every consultation requires sincerity. Second question you had?
Yeah, my second question was for the beggar.
Mm-hmm.
Given that there's like a crisis of homelessness pretty much everywhere, how do we apply this in our time?
Given the crisis, there's two parts to that. Individual charity is not going to solve a structural problem. The crisis of homelessness, lack of access to basic necessities, healthcare that we have is a structural problem. And Muslims should be advocates, societally and politically, for a structural solution, right? Muslims shouldn't be just looking for my own interests, reducing my taxes, reducing regulations on my business. We should be looking for structural solutions. That's a big part of these crises that you're talking about. It's a structural problem. It's not an individual problem. But when it comes to the individual level, do what you can to help. If you know somebody is deserving, the Imam says, then give to that person. If you have a doubt, then question your own doubt. The fact that I doubt whether the person is deserving, are they really homeless, or are they just trying to, is this their business? The Imam says, recognize maybe it's shaitan. And if you don't give to that person, then refuse them in a very gentle manner. And if you can, then still provide them help, and at the very least, pray for them. Right? So there's an individual and a structural component. All right, then the Imam says, what about the person that you ask? So you're the beggar now, right? Or the one asking for assistance. If the person gives you something, accept it with gratitude. Don't say, well, I was expecting a lot more from you. And if the person refuses, the Imam says, look for an excuse for that person and have husnul dhan, have a good estimation. And then the Imam says, remember, if they refuse, it was their own wealth, it was their own property that they refused. You didn't have a right or a claim to it. So don't become entitled. And that's especially true with intimate relationships. Sometimes if I have a brother or a sister or a close friend, right, and you should have expectations, but you shouldn't have entitlement. If they refuse, maybe they're making a mistake, that's on them. But I should not be entitled or arrogant if somebody that I've asked for assistance is refusing. And that's a very important thing. Remember that it is a kindness and not an expectation or an entitlement when somebody helps another person. Now we come to some of these very subtle points the Imam mentions. Since we're coming close to the end of our time, we'll go a little bit quickly. If somebody pleases you, like somebody makes you happy, the Imam says that's either deliberate or it's accidental. Either they intended to make you happy or something they did just happens to make you happy without them intending it. If they did it deliberately, first praise Allah, then praise that person, thank that person, and find a way to repay that person. Because they did you a favor, they made you happy. So, find a way to repay them. If it's accidental, meaning they did something that makes you happy, but they never intended to make you happy. It's just a coincidence. Normally we might say that, well, I don't owe that person anything, because they didn't do it deliberately. Right? That's our default response. The Imam says no. In this case, praise God, thank that person, and then value that person and love that person because they didn't intend to please you, but God did. And then God made them the means by which something good happened to you. The means by which God gives you a benefit is something that you should be happy about. So see how beautifully and subtly the Imam draws our attention to something that we might not normally know. If they did it deliberately, of course you're going to thank them. You owe it to them. But even if they did it accidentally, there's no accidents and there's no coincidences in creation. That accident or that coincidence, it wasn't intended by that person. But was it accidental on the part of God? No. It was deliberate on the part of God. And God chose that person to be the means by which something good happened to you. So there's nothing to repay because the person didn't do it deliberately. But there is something to value and appreciate because God chose that person to be the means by which a good thing came to you. And then finally, if there's somebody who displeases you, they do something that angers you or makes you unhappy, right, that displeases you. If they did it deliberately, the best thing that you can do is to be forgiving. Except if forgiving the person is going to cause harm. In that case, then stand up for yourself. So don't be a doormat, but don't insist on getting what is your due. If they're deliberately angering you or being unkind, your default is what? Forgive. Unless your forgiveness is going to, encourage them to do more harm. In that case, stand up for yourself. Not because you want revenge, but why? Because you want to prevent that person from doing harm. Then the Imam says, sometimes people do things that anger you, but it's not on purpose. Their plans changed, they got caught in traffic and they're making you late. Right? They're causing problems for you, they're making life more difficult for you, but they're not doing it deliberately. The Imam says then, in that case, if you call them out, you're going to call them out deliberately. That's unfair. That's oppressive. Harm came to you from them accidentally, and harm is going to come to them from you deliberately. Don't do that. Don't be unfair. If it was deliberate harm to you, default is forgiveness, unless forgiveness is going to cause more damage. And if the harm was accidental, then don't take revenge, because your revenge or your calling them out is going to be deliberate, and that is unfair. When it comes to co-religionists, ahlu millatik, the people of your ummah, what you owe them is mercy. You owe them to be gentle with the ones who are wrongdoers. You owe to seek to better their affairs, istislah. You owe it to them to pray for them and to kafful adha, avoid bothering them or harming them. Treat every group appropriately. If somebody is an old man, consider them your father. If somebody is younger than you, consider them your child. If there is an old woman, consider her to be your mother. That is what you owe the people of your ummah. Then, this is something very beautiful. The Imam says, if they do good to you, then thank them. And if they do good to themselves, thank them. If you do good to yourself, why should I thank you? Let's say that you work hard and you get a promotion. You're doing good to yourself, right? The Imam says thank the person for that. Why? Because you're one family. If your family member succeeds and gets ahead, their success is your success. You're not doing it to benefit me, you're doing it to benefit yourself. But I should consider, you're my ummah, you're my millah, you're my brother or sister, I should consider your success to be my success. I should be grateful to you for you getting ahead. Why? Because that lifts the standard of our ummah. I want to see more successful people, professionally, economically, spiritually, personally, good families, good marriages, good jobs, good education. You want to see that success within your ummah. And when people do well for themselves, materially or in any other way, consider that to be a favor that they're doing to you, not just a favor that they're doing to themselves. It's a very beautiful concept. It's not just don't be jealous. It's actually feel like their success is your success. And then the Imam says it actually is a benefit to you. Because if they didn't do well, you would be obligated to support them. So the fact that they're doing well, they don't need your support, it actually is a favor that they're doing to you, because it's taking a burden off of your back. And then the Imam says, finally, ahlul dhimma, non-Muslims, particularly non-Muslim minorities in a Muslim society. Unfortunately, these are groups that often feel marginalized. In the Middle East today, you can see in many countries where they are not treated well, or they don't feel safe, or they feel like there is just one accusation of blasphemy between them and serious harm. The Imam says, fulfill God's covenant to Ahlul Dhimma, do not oppress them. So that is the conclusion of the 50 rights that Imam Zainul Abidin mentions. We mentioned a few of them in brief, and that brings us to a conclusion. We do have about 3 or 4 minutes. So if there's any questions, we can address questions, and then we can conclude. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Go ahead, question.
Yeah, so I didn't see like any mention of like friends. If these are like, ordered like...
No, we had several categories of friends. One was jalis, which we mentioned as a comrade, somebody you sit with. One is sahib, somebody you associate with. And one was khalid, somebody that you kind of interact with in the course of your day.
Like cousins or like, other relatives.
So other relatives, so these 50 are not comprehensive, right? Animals have a right, the environment has a right. Did you say cousins, relatives, uncles, aunts? They all have a right. What the Imam is doing is setting a foundation for us to appreciate that we have rights and responsibilities that surround us. There are other rights that we can add, but this is setting a basis for us to understand the way in which our responsibilities operate on our person. So remember the structure. The origin of all rights is what? God. From God, you have rights on your own self. Your limbs, your organs, and then your actions have a right upon you. And then it extends outward from there, right? Your teacher, your student, your benefactor, people, wealth, all of those things are extensions of those rights. So we could add other rights, but this was meant to be a brief treatise to establish a foundation of conceiving of your life in terms of rights and relationships. It's not meant to be a comprehensive enumeration of all of the rights or the possible relationships that you have.
So if you consider your cousin to be a brother, for example, would the same right of the brother?
Yeah, the ones that are not mentioned, they will be, extensions of these same rights that are mentioned. So your relatives, for example, they might fit into several of these categories. As a brother, as Ahlul Millah, a member of your ummah, as a benefactor, as an associate or a friend. So there might be several categories that they will fit into. And some of the other rights that are not mentioned, they're mentioned in other ahadith. So for example, many ahadith talk about silatul rahim in general, and verses of the Quran as well. The rights of animals, the rights of the environment, right? Those are mentioned in ahadith, but they're not mentioned explicitly in Risalat ul-Huquq.
Another thing is that, what about like single parents with the rights of the mother and father be like for a single parent?
No, even with single parents, the rights are still there. So,
Father, will you have the same rights as the mother?
no, in Islam, the rights that are given by our creation, they are inalienable. So let's say, for example, there is a person whose parents, for whatever reason, were not able to raise them, and it's somebody else who fulfilled the role of a mother or fulfilled the role of a father, right? Somebody had to step in, whether a single parent or an uncle or an aunt. The right of your actual parent, mother or father, that's inalienable. There might be a role that another person has fulfilled, and you have to show gratitude and honor that role, but it doesn't take away from the role of your actual mother or your actual father in terms of your birth, in terms of your creation, in terms of biology. In our society in America, sometimes people, they make that mistake. They say that, well, the family that loved me and the family that was there for me is my family. And I don't want to have anything to do with my biological family. Yes, if somebody else stepped up, you should honor that, you should respect that, but not at the expense of the right that your mother or your father or your other relatives have. Does that answer your question? That you cannot take away those inalienable rights.
So why is the brother not inalienable? Sorry.
The brother too. Any of those rights given by Allah, those are inalienable. It's not transactional. It's not that my mother has to do this for me and then I will be kind to her. My father has to be this way for me and then I will be kind to him. No, even if your father does not fulfill his fatherly responsibilities, that's on him. But you still have to fulfill your responsibility as a son or daughter.
Question was a couple other categories. It seemed like they were missing. One was the husband, and two, I wondered if the word regarding brother, is it a word specific to a male sibling, or is it interchangeable as a sibling such that the section on brother would also be assumed for sister?
Good question. So there are some things that are missing. The husband is missing, the sister is missing. Part of it is because, remember what Imam Zain al-Abidin was doing. he was teaching and training people within a certain society in a context. So for example, for us, slave, freedman, like these relationships are not actually present in our society. But the Imam was largely dealing with people who may be new to the school of Ahlul Bayt. Many of them were the slaves that Imam Zainul Abidin, he used to purchase, and he used to provide them material support and then religious training, and then he would set them free. As you guys, I'm sure you've heard in different speeches, this was the practice of the Imam every Ramadan. He would set many of his slaves free when they had reached their education. So this book, it's not meant to be a comprehensive list of all of the possible relationships, but a way to train people. And ones that are not mentioned, though, we can understand their importance by analogy with what is mentioned. So the right mentions, for example, your wife, but when the Imam says be grateful for your spouse, then that applies in both directions. And there are some other details that the Imam mentions about the right of the wife and the right of the husband. In fact, in that instance, indirectly, they're both mentioned. The brother, that is speaking of a brother in the source of the brother being your hand, your back, your might, your strength. That might not apply equally to a sister, but the message of honoring that relationship that Allah has created, because Allah gave you your brother and Allah gave you your sister, that will be generalizable. So the Imam spotlights certain relationships because those were the ones that were present within society and that were the most important in actually training, let's say, those young mu'mineen or those freed slaves or those people that the Imam was readying to be the next generation of Muslim leaders and scholars and pious believers. Many other relationships, though, can be understood by analogy or by implication from what is mentioned. So don't think of the ones that are not mentioned as a gap. Think of them as being things that Imam Zainul Abidin left between the lines, including, for example, the relationship of a husband, including the relationship of a sister. Does that answer your question? Right? Maybe one or two final questions? Go ahead.
I'm curious about the part about what your children do is attributable to the parents. Is there this might sound kind of ridiculous, but is there a point at which it stops being attributable?
Yes, it's not mentioned in this hadith. It's a very good question. The hadith say that when your children are baligh, your job is simply to point them in the right direction. If they take it, that's to their benefit. If they don't take it, you're not responsible. So sometimes parents feel an additional burden. Your job is to facilitate, to educate, to help your children do good, be pious, teach them their religion, model good behavior, help them. But once they are adults, once they are baligh, they're responsible for their actions. Culturally and socially, people might still say, this is part of that family. But as a parent, you don't have to have that burden on your shoulder that if your child is, let's say, 20 or 30, if they make a bad decision, that's not your responsibility. Your job is simply to educate, to facilitate, to help them, but they're responsible if they reject. And there are numerous hadith that do say that yes, there is a point where that responsibility ends. And that point is when the child is adult and independent and able to make their own decisions. As a parent, you still give good advice, but then you leave it to them to adopt that good advice. And God forbid if they don't, then try to keep a relationship. Maybe they will realize their mistake and they will come back after a period of time. Sometimes prayer is more important than just nagging with a child forever. because Allah is the one who changes people's hearts. Last question, inshallah.
Yeah, so there is a category of rights of Imam. Do you think the book talks about, in context of Hujjat-e-Khuda, like the rights of dual Imam on us at this point? Is there a context for that? And if you go on a category-wise, do you think the right of Imam, if there is a context already, do you think that sits like at a fourth level or should be below the rights of God?
So the Imam in this Risala mentions the leaders, it's not specifically in the context of the Ma'soom. Because I mentioned yesterday there's a slight difference in the version that speaks about the Sultan, the government. But both versions mention that sometimes the government will oppress you. And if you provoke the government, then you are partially responsible for the oppression that they are going to do. They're oppressing, but by provoking it, you also bear some responsibility. You shouldn't have done that. So clearly, it's not the Imam Ma'soom. God forbid the Imam Ma'soom would never exceed the authority given to him by God, would never oppress. So the Imam there is speaking of the governmental authorities and the kings that existed in his time and throughout Islamic history. So we don't have a clear and explicit enumeration of the right of the Prophet and the Imams. But that is implicit within the right of God. Because if we look at the verse of Quran, إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, the right of the Prophet and the right of the Imam, it flows directly from the right of God. It's the same wilayah of Allah. So Risalat ul-Huquq doesn't explicitly mention, this is what you owe Prophet Muhammad, this is what you owe your Imam Ma'soom, but it's implicit within what you owe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because to obey them is part of the commandment and the wilayah and the debt that you owe to Allah. But what's mentioned in Risalat al-Huquq is the sultan or the political authority that would be the government or the king who is not ma'soom. Does that answer the question? So once again, thank you all for joining us for this session. It was about 3 hours in total. I know yesterday some of you might have thought that it was just going to be a half-hour lecture and it went on longer than expected. But this was the minimum, I think, that we could do to try to get a little bit of a deeper understanding of Risalat al-Huquq. And if we have the opportunity, maybe we can have a session where we look at these sections in greater detail. Because if you want to actually do justice to Risalat al-Huquq, then it would be a session where you have maybe 30 or 40 sessions and you go through each individual section in a little bit more detail. This was just to get a taste and a flavor, and hopefully it was enough for us to appreciate the value of these teachings, and in particular, the shift in focus that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam gives us with respect to our rights. So, even I and all of us will forget some of the details. We're not going to be able to list those 50 rights and all of the details of those 50 rights a week from today. But hopefully, the perspective that we gain, that will remain with us. Remember that rights are very important. Don't try to live a carefree life. Don't try to shirk responsibilities. Sometimes people say that, I don't want to get married. It's a responsibility. I don't want to have kids. It's a responsibility. Or I don't want to sign up because they had the campaign for the monthly donation. I don't want to sign up for the monthly donation because it's a responsibility. I don't want to sign up to volunteer or to serve in an Islamic institution. I want to just keep my weekends free. Don't try to run away from responsibilities. Rights, the Imam says, those rights, they already surround you. By volunteering and by stepping up, you're just finding a way to honor those rights in the best possible manner. It's not like by avoiding marriage or avoiding having children or avoiding making a donation or avoiding volunteering, you don't have responsibilities. You have responsibilities. You have rights that you owe other people, you're just not living up to them. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you don't have responsibilities. So that's the perspective that we get from Risalat ul-Huquq. These rights, they surround us, they are muhitatun bina, they are encompassing us. We want to do our best to live up to them, inshallah. And reviewing these teachings is one way that we can do that. So we will, inshallah, conclude with that. For Marhum Sayyid Muhammad Rida al-Jalali, who researched this book, and for all of our ulama and shuhada, and all of those who have served the path of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, let us recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. There will be a time change, remember, tomorrow, so remember that for sahur. Remember that those of you who come for Jum'ah will be at 1:15 inshallah. Quran circle will be at 6:15, 6:45 tomorrow. 6:30 tomorrow, inshallah. And the workshops that we have coming up, because the time will be a little bit later, we'll shorten them a little bit. So instead of an hour and a half, they will be between an hour and 15 minutes. So the workshops later in this month will be a little bit shorter in duration. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
I'm not too burned out.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum.
If a spouse develops amnesia or dementia or some other mental illness such that they can't remember their marriage,